I never imagined that my world could shatter so completely. My name is Michael, and for years I believed I lived in a perfect life, a life built on trust, mutual respect, and the simple joys of shared routines. I had been married to Emily for nearly 8 years, and to the outside world, our union looked flawless. We lived in a comfortable suburban home where every morning began with the gentle hum of daily life and every evening ended with the quiet satisfaction of having built a life together. I always took pride in our home. Every detail, every photo on the wall, and every memory we created felt like a testament to our love. I used to wake up each day with the certainty that Emily was right there, managing our home with grace and care. Her presence was like a soft melody in the background of my life, ever present, reassuring, and familiar. She had a way of turning our house into a sanctuary, a place where every cushion, every framed photograph, and every small keepsake told a story of laughter, tears, and dreams fulfilled. We shared simple rituals, a cup of coffee together before leaving for work, quiet dinners, and long, meandering conversations about the future. Life was predictable, and that predictability was its own kind of comfort. Yet, somewhere between the mundane routines and everyday comforts, I began to notice subtle changes. At first, they were almost unnoticeable, a few extra minutes spent in her study, more frequent late afternoon walks by herself, and an increasing need for privacy. I reminded myself that everyone needed a little time alone, that a creative soul sometimes craved solitude to gather thoughts. But as days turned into weeks, the small changes started to form a pattern that I couldn't shake off, a pattern that hinted at secrets I wasn't ready to confront. One cool autumn evening, I returned home expecting the usual warmth and welcome. Instead, I was greeted by an unsettling silence. The house, usually vibrant with the sounds of everyday life, felt strangely empty and cold. I called out for Emily, walked through every room, and found nothing but quiet emptiness. The clock on the wall confirmed that it was far past her usual dinner hour. My phone remained silent when I tried calling her, and the unease that had been growing inside me now felt impossible to ignore. I sat on our old, familiar sofa that night, feeling the weight of the silence and the chill of a coffee that had long gone cold. Memories started to resurface, the half-glances she'd cast in passing, the hurried whispers on her phone when I entered the room, the way she'd sometimes retreat to a corner when I was talking about something important. I tried to convince myself these were merely signs of a busy day or a fleeting need for space, but deep down I knew something was off. The next morning brought no answers. Instead, it deepened my anxiety. As I shuffled into the kitchen, still groggy from a night of fitful sleep, I noticed Emily's phone lying on the counter. It was unusual for her to leave it out in the open, and the way it was carelessly placed sent a shiver down my spine. My heart pounded as I picked it up and unlocked it out of a desperate need to understand what was happening. My eyes landed on a series of messages that made my breath catch in my throat, conversations filled with vague references to late drives, exciting nights, and, curiously, repeated mentions of a Dodge HELLCAT SRT. I recalled a local man who had recently become a topic of conversation among car enthusiasts in town, a man known for his reckless charm and the ferocity of his Dodge HELLCAT SRT. At first, I dismissed the idea that my Emily could be involved with someone like that. But the messages grew more frequent and personal, and every new notification on her phone painted a picture of secret rendezvous and stolen moments. I sat there, scrolling through her messages, as each line deepened the void in my chest. The words were casual, almost offhand, yet every phrase was a dagger twisting in my gut. Questions raced through my mind. When had our conversations turned into cryptic hints of a hidden life? Was it possible that the quiet evenings we shared were nothing more than a fragile facade masking a dangerous betrayal? Each memory, every seemingly insignificant moment, was suddenly recast in a harsh, accusatory light. I recalled the times when she'd laugh a little too loudly at her phone, or when her eyes would dart away whenever I entered the room. The signs, once so subtle, now screamed of a deception that I could no longer ignore. In the days that followed, I became a prisoner in my own home, confined by a growing dread and a desperate need to uncover the truth. I began documenting every anomaly, the times her phone lit up with unknown numbers, the moments when she seemed to be whispering into the darkness, the unexplained absences that now took on a sinister quality. I felt as if I were living two lives, one that I thought was full of love and trust, and another that was rapidly dissolving into lies and betrayal. Every evening, I would sit in silence, the hum of the refrigerator and the distant murmur of passing cars reminding me of a normalcy that now felt painfully elusive. I replayed the messages over and over in my mind, each word etching itself into my memory like a scar. I found myself staring at the ceiling for hours, wondering how a life built on the foundations of love could crumble so completely. I questioned everything I once held dear, our shared dreams, the promises we made, and the very essence of the bond we'd nurtured over the years. That night, as the darkness pressed in and the quiet became unbearable, I knew I had reached a turning point. I had to confront the reality of what I had discovered, no matter how much it would hurt. The path ahead was uncertain, and every step promised to peel away another layer of the life I thought I knew. My heart ached with the weight of a betrayal that seemed too vast to comprehend, yet I also knew that only by facing it could I begin to reclaim what had been lost. I realized then that the man with the Dodge HELLCAT SRT was not merely a stranger in our lives, but a symbol of everything dangerous and alluring that had lured my wife away. His presence in her messages was like a silent declaration of a double life, a life filled with thrills and risk, far removed from the steady comfort of our existence. I felt betrayed not just by the act itself, but by the gradual erosion of trust that had crept into our marriage without me ever noticing the signs. With a heavy heart, I resolved to gather every piece of evidence, every stray message, every detail that could help me understand where I had gone wrong. I was determined to learn how the person I loved so deeply had become someone capable of such deception. I knew that the journey ahead would be painful and that each step toward the truth might irreparably alter the course of my life, but it was a path I had no choice but to take. That long, sleepless night marked the beginning of a painful quest, a journey into the depths of betrayal and heartache. I began to chronicle every moment of doubt and every spark of realization, clinging to the hope that through understanding, I might eventually find a way to heal. As I lay there, listening to the quiet sounds of the night, I vowed to myself that I would uncover the full extent of this hidden life, even if it meant facing the most painful truths about the woman I once believed I knew inside out. In that moment, as the night stretched on and the first hints of dawn began to break through the darkness, I felt both the crushing weight of despair and a spark of resolve. My journey had only just begun, and the road ahead promised to be as treacherous as it was transformative. I was forced to confront a reality where the lines between love and betrayal were blurred, and where the person I once trusted had become a stranger in the shadows of our shared past. The days that followed were a disorienting mix of routine and revelation. I found myself unable to fully engage in the everyday tasks that once provided comfort. Every creak of the floorboard, every unexpected ring of the telephone, set my nerves on edge as I braced myself for another reminder of the secrets that lurked in the corners of our life. I spent hours poring over Emily's phone, desperate to piece together a timeline that might explain the inexplicable. Each message, each cryptic reference to late-night escapades and secret rendezvous, was a brick in the wall that separated me from the life I once knew. I began to notice details I had previously dismissed, small inconsistencies that now loomed large in my mind. There was the time she mentioned a friend's number that I never heard of again, the odd hours when she insisted on being unreachable, and the strange pauses in our conversations when I would casually bring up our plans for the future. The more I searched, the more I found evidence that pointed to a life that existed parallel to ours, a life where excitement and danger were never far behind. One evening, when the house was cloaked in a deceptive calm, I decided to retrace the steps of the previous nights. I sat at our dining table with nothing but the glow of a single lamp to keep the shadows at bay and began reading through every message I had salvaged from her phone. There, intermingled with mundane texts, were snippets of conversation that hinted at secret meetings. There were messages that spoke of tonight's drive and an adventure that can't be missed, phrases that I had once thought were merely playful banter. But in the context of what I now knew, there were coded invitations to a life of recklessness. My heart sank as I stumbled upon several photos, grainy images taken at night, capturing the unmistakable silhouette of a sleek car parked outside a restaurant I had never visited. The car was unmistakably a Dodge HELLCAT SRT, its powerful lines and aggressive stance a stark contrast to the quiet life I had built. The photos were brief, almost accidental, yet they confirmed what my growing suspicions had long suggested. Emily had been meeting someone who represented everything wild and unpredictable, a man who lived life on the edge. I began to question every little detail of our relationship. Memories of casual conversations now seemed laden with hidden meanings. The smile she gave when talking on the phone, the way her eyes would occasionally glimmer with something I couldn't quite place, it all began to add up. I found myself replaying our interactions over and over, searching for a clue that might have hinted at this double life. I scoured through our old text messages, rewatching videos, and reading through emails with the frantic hope that I might find some explanation for the gaps in our stories. As the evidence mounted, a storm of emotions brewed inside me. Anger, sorrow, and a deep sense of betrayal warred with each other, leaving me emotionally exhausted. I felt as if I were standing at the edge of a precipice, looking down at a chasm formed by lies and half-truths. The man with the HELLCAT had become a phantom in my life, a symbol of everything dangerous that had crept into the sanctuary of our home. I couldn't help but wonder if I had been too complacent, too trusting, or perhaps just too blind to notice the subtle shifts in her behavior. Every night, I lay awake listening to the sound of my own thoughts, each one echoing with regret and questions. I found myself wrestling with the idea of confronting her, torn between the desperate need for answers and the fear of further destruction. I recorded every observation in a battered journal, each page filled with meticulous notes about her every unusual move, every missed phone call, every odd comment overheard in passing. It felt as though I was both the detective and the victim in a mystery that I never wanted to solve. I started following a pattern, a routine that she had seemingly adopted without my knowledge. Her schedule became a puzzle, and I began piecing together the fragments. The late afternoons when she would claim to be out running errands, the evenings that she described as time spent with old friends, and the weekends that always seemed to be filled with vague, untraceable plans. It was as if every minute of her day was now under a magnifying glass, and I was desperate to discover the truth hidden within those fleeting moments. One particularly bitter evening, I returned home early from work, determined to catch a glimpse of the reality I had feared for so long. I found her in a tense conversation on the phone, her voice low and hurried, laden with words that sent a chill down my spine. I hovered in the doorway, straining to catch fragments of her conversation. Words like tonight, drive, and it's getting serious floated through the thin wall of her study. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly retreated, each step weighted with the knowledge that nothing I did from that moment on could ever restore the innocence of our past. The more I uncovered, the more I felt the painful sting of realization. Every secret meeting, every whispered conversation in the dead of night, was a betrayal that eroded the foundation of what we once had. I was caught in a relentless spiral of doubt and disbelief, unable to reconcile the woman I loved with the one who now existed in the shadows of deceit. And yet, despite the overwhelming evidence, there remained a stubborn part of me that clung to the hope of understanding, a hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a reason behind it all. In the silent aftermath of each discovery, I would sit in the dark and wonder how my life had become a battleground between trust and suspicion. The home that had once been a refuge now felt like a prison built of secrets, and every familiar corner was tainted by the knowledge of her hidden affair. I began to question not only her actions but also my own shortcomings. Had I failed to see the signs? Had I been too absorbed in the comfort of routine to notice the undercurrents of betrayal? Each night, as I scribbled down another painful observation in my journal, I felt the fragments of my old self slip away. I realized that the man I once was, a man of unwavering trust and quiet hope, was being forced to evolve into someone hardened by betrayal. And yet, amidst the sorrow and anger, there was also an undeniable desire to reclaim my life, to understand the forces that had driven my wife away into the arms of a man whose very presence was as reckless as the roaring engine of his HELLCAT. In those long, solitary hours, the truth became a heavy burden I had no choice but to bear. I knew that if I ever wanted to move forward, I would have to face this reality head-on. The secrets, the lies, and the ghost of the HELLCAT had already altered the course of our lives irrevocably. There was no returning to the innocent beginnings of our love, only a slow, painful march toward a future defined by the scars of betrayal. With the evidence spread out before me like a jigsaw puzzle missing its central piece, I resolved that the next step was inevitable. I had to confront the truth, no matter how devastating it might be. I steeled myself for the inevitable confrontation, knowing that nothing would ever be the same once the final truths were laid bare. And so, with the weight of every word and every hidden secret pressing down on me, I prepared myself for the confrontation that would shatter the remnants of our once sacred bond. The day of confrontation arrived as quietly as a winter storm, leaving me feeling numb and detached. Every moment leading up to that inevitable hour was spent in agonizing anticipation, each second stretching out like an eternity. I watched Emily from a distance that morning, her movements measured and calm, as if she were oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. But I knew better. Every subtle gesture, every fleeting glance, carried the heavy burden of secrets that could no longer be hidden. I waited until the evening, when the house was empty of distractions, to sit her down. In our modest kitchen, The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant echo of my own heartbeat. My hands trembled as I tried to find the right words, struggling to bridge the chasm that had formed between us. Finally, with a voice that wavered between sorrow and fury, I asked her the question that had haunted me for months. "Emily, who is he?" For a long moment, she said nothing. Her eyes, usually so warm and familiar, darted away as if searching for an escape from the inevitable truth. The silence that followed was suffocating, a thick pause that spoke volumes of all that had been concealed. I could feel every heartbeat, every tremor of emotion as the air around us grew heavy with unspoken confessions. Then, slowly, she began to speak. Her voice was low and tentative, each word laced with regret. She admitted that she had been involved with a man who drove a Dodge HELLCAT SRT, a man whose life was a stark contrast to the quiet, orderly existence we had built together. As she spoke, the room seemed to shrink around us, every word hammering home the reality that our life was now irrevocably changed. I listened in a daze as she described how the thrill of secret meetings and the allure of danger had gradually drawn her into a world I never knew existed. She spoke of late-night drives along empty roads, of whispered promises made in the dark, and of a life filled with an excitement that our routine had long since lost. Each confession was like a knife twisting deeper into my heart, a reminder that the woman I loved had been living a double life right under my nose. The conversation that ensued was raw and chaotic, a collision of emotions that left us both exposed and broken. I demanded to know how long it had been, and with tears streaming down her face, she admitted it had been months. In that instant, every shared memory, every quiet moment of intimacy, was tainted by the betrayal. I could no longer see the truth in her eyes, only the reflection of a life that belonged to someone else. My voice broke as I tried to articulate the pain and disbelief that had consumed me. I asked her why. Why the secrecy? Why the lies? Why the need for the thrill that only a dangerous liaison could bring? Her responses were a tangled mix of apologies, half-truths, and a desperate attempt to justify what she called a momentary lapse in judgment. But no matter how much she tried to explain, the reality was unyielding. The foundation of our marriage had been undermined by secrets and deceit. The confrontation left me numb, a mixture of shock, sorrow, and a burning anger that I couldn't quite contain. I felt as if the trust one had built over years was now a distant memory, replaced by a haunting void that no words could fill. The man with the HELLCAT had not only stolen her affection, but had also eroded the very essence of what made our relationship sacred. In that moment, I realized that everything had changed. The life I thought I knew was gone, replaced by a landscape of broken promises and shattered dreams. As the evening wore on and the reality of her betrayal sank in, I sat alone in the quiet aftermath, the silence more deafening than any argument could ever be. I was left to grapple with a truth that was as harsh as it was final. The confrontation had stripped away every illusion, leaving only raw pain and a lingering question. Could we ever rebuild what had been destroyed? In the days that followed, I wandered through our once familiar home as if it were a foreign land. Every room held memories of happier times, now overlaid with the bitter residue of deceit. I tried to return to normalcy, but the weight of her betrayal was a constant companion, a shadow that darkened every corner of my mind. I began to document every moment, every glance, every silence, as if by writing it down, I could somehow reclaim the truth that had been lost. Each entry in my journal was a testament to the unraveling of our past, a painful reminder that nothing would ever be the same again. Every attempt at conversation with Emily became a tightrope walk over a chasm of mistrust. The woman I once adored was now a stranger cloaked in secrets, and every word she uttered was met with the lingering echo of my disbelief. I longed for answers, for some shred of the old warmth we once shared, but the betrayal had built a wall between us that seemed insurmountable. Even as she tried to reach out with apologies and soft-spoken promises, I found myself retreating into silence, unwilling to let her words fill the void left by her actions. In those agonizing days, I realized that the confrontation was only the beginning of a long journey, a journey through grief, anger, and ultimately, the quest for healing. The road ahead was uncertain, and the scars left by her betrayal would take years to fade. Yet, in the midst of the heartache, there was a small, persistent hope that I could reclaim parts of myself that had been lost along the way. In the weeks and months following the confrontation, the true test of my strength began. I was left to navigate the wreckage of our once happy life, struggling to understand how trust could be rebuilt when it had been so thoroughly betrayed. The days were a blur of emotions, a relentless cycle of anger, sadness, and moments of numb acceptance that left me questioning whether I could ever emerge whole again. I started to distance myself from the constant reminders of what once was. I would take long walks around the neighborhood, each step a small act of defiance against the despair that threatened to consume me. In the quiet solitude of those walks, I allowed myself to grieve not just for the betrayal, but for the loss of the life I had believed in for so long. I found solace in the simple act of writing, filling pages of a journal with my thoughts, regrets, and the painful insights that came from facing a truth I had never wanted to acknowledge. There were days when the pain was overwhelming, days when I would find myself staring blankly at old photographs, memories of laughter and shared dreams now turned bittersweet by the sting of betrayal. I began to question everything about our past. Was the love we shared ever real? Or had it all been built on a fragile illusion? Each memory, once a source of comfort, now served as a painful reminder of how deeply I had been deceived. Yet even in the darkest moments, there emerged a quiet resolve within me, a determination to reclaim my identity, to find meaning in the aftermath of a love that had turned sour. I sought out therapy and found a support group where others, too, shared their stories of betrayal and recovery. In those meetings, I was not alone. I listened as others recounted their own heartbreaks, and I began to see that while the wounds of betrayal might never fully heal, they could eventually give way to a new understanding of self. I learned that forgiveness was not a gift for the one who had wronged me, but a necessary step for my own liberation, a way to release the burden of anger and allow myself the possibility of renewal. Gradually, I started to rebuild my daily routine. I returned to hobbies I had long abandoned, reconnected with friends who had stood by me even in silence, and began to explore interests that reminded me of the man I once was. Every small act of self-care was a rebellion against the despair that had threatened to define my existence. I learned to appreciate the beauty of a sunrise, the quiet moments of reflection, and the simple pleasure of moving forward, even if the path was fraught with memories of pain. The journey was not linear. There were setbacks, a day when the sound of a car engine would transport me back to that fateful night, or a casual remark from Emily that would reopen old wounds. But slowly, I began to understand that healing was not about erasing the past. It was about learning to live with it, accepting that the scars of betrayal would always be a part of my story, but not its defining feature. I came to see that the man with the HELLCAT, for all the chaos he had brought into our lives, had also forced me to confront parts of myself that I had long neglected. In that painful confrontation with betrayal, I discovered a resilience I never knew existed. Now, as I sit here looking out at a new dawn, I realize that while the path ahead remains uncertain, I have taken the first steps toward reclaiming my life. The memories of betrayal still echo in the recesses of my mind, but they no longer dictate the rhythm of my existence. I am learning to trust again, not just in others, but in myself. Every new day is a promise of possibility, a chance to build something authentic out of the ruins of a shattered past. This is the story of my journey from the depths of betrayal to the slow, painful process of healing. It is a testament to the fact that even when trust is broken, and the life you once knew is irretrievably lost, there remains within you a spark of hope. That spark, however fragile, can ignite a new beginning, a future forged not in the shadow of betrayal, but in the light of a hard-won resilience. And so, even as I carry the scars of what has been, I look to tomorrow with a cautious optimism, knowing that every step forward is a victory over the pain of yesterday.